Hey everyone, welcome to the Jedok Geom series. In this multi-part series, then we'll be exploring the Admiral's sword, a Korean Joseon dynasty sword form that was recorded in Muyedo Hongji. So to start with, I'd like to say that I'm not an expert, but I have been studying this sword form from Muyedo Hongji for the last 2 years, and in way of English translation, then there isn't much. So I wanted to put my own detailed transcription of the form out there. You can find that in the link below. So I took it from the forms that they practice in Korea over at Suwon Fortress, and I quite meticulously recorded their steps and their performance of the form. So if you want to learn that, then feel free to access that down below. It's free, and if you want to share that with friends, go ahead. However, I personally disagreed with a few parts and a few things that they did there. So since April 2020, then I've been working on making my own interpretation of it, and I've been writing that in there, which you can find in that same document down below. So what is Jedok Geom? Jedok Geom literally translates to the Admiral's sword, and it's a two-handed sword form created by Admiral Lee Rusong, who was a Chinese admiral of Korean descent who took part in the Imjin War and was particularly famous for the retaking of Seoul in 1593. And so while he was in Korea in the Imjin War, then he taught Korean soldiers his sword form so that they could help defend themselves against the Japanese. And so Admiral Lee Rusong created this sword form for battlefield purpose, and he used it, and so this was a practical based sword form that is not too flashy, and honestly I think it's quite a simple base form that allows you to build off it. So let's talk about the lineage of Jedok Geom, the Admiral's sword. So Admiral Lee Rusong created the sword form, he practiced it, it was his natural sword fighting form, and then during the Imjin War, with the help of Admiral Naksanji, then he taught it to Korean soldiers in Korea throughout this time. Then it was forgotten for quite some time. It was still practiced in China, but not in Korea. And then in Korea in 1759, then Prince Sado went and he wanted to compile the martial arts, so he created Muyeshimbo, which is a later version of Muyejebo and an earlier version of Muyedobo's Hongji, and that was 1759, so he re-recorded it for the Koreans to learn and practice. So then it was taught to Korean soldiers in the military for some time. Then the Japanese colonial period happened in Korea. So until 1945, from the late 1800s, then this form was actually banned and they weren't allowed to practice it. After 1945, at the end of the Japanese colonial period, then modern Koreans took it up again and tried to relearn it and created their own interpretation of it. So as you can see, then there's a lot of interpretations of interpretations of interpretations. So it's a lot of Chinese whispers, which is why I feel quite comfortable saying that if you want to create your own interpretation and you disagree with mine or the original, go ahead, feel free to. And really, Admiral's sword is about making it your own sword form that works for you. So let's talk about some of the facts that we know about Jedok Geom. So it's a battlefield sword form made for practicality, and Lee Rusong created it, used it himself on the battlefield. And it's primarily a slashing form with only one stabbing stance, in contrast to other Korean sword forms which have a lot of stabbing stances and fewer slashing forms. Now, Admiral Lee Rusong used a 3-shaku 4-sun blade, and this blade was actually found in Korea at the time of writing Muyeshimbo, because when he was in Korea, then he had a mistress who had a son, and so he gave the sword to them and it passed down that way. And so they actually found his exact sword, so we can say this is the length of the sword that he used. Now, other Korean sword styles that use this length of sword in Muyedo Hongji are Yedo, byeolungeom, and byeolungeom. So it differs quite a bit from those other ones. So Yedo and byeolungeom were primarily for show. They weren't a practical battlefield-based sword form. So if we look at byeolungeom, then it was based off a Shilla sword dancer who did sword dancing and happened to assassinate a king. So his sword form is for show, it's not for practicality on the battlefield. And Yedo is from China, and so over there then they have demonstrations at banquets and things like that. And Yedo very much seems like one of those forms. It has sword spins, it has a lot of flashy techniques, and that's in stark contrast to Jedok Geom, which is a very simple, down-to-earth form for practicality. Now, byeolungeom comes from Japanese swordsmanship, and it also is made for practicality. However, it differs from Jedok Geom because byeolungeom targets dueling with samurai, and Jedok Geom is mostly a battlefield form rather than a dueling one-on-one situation type sword. So now let's talk about some of the myths. So often you hear Jedok Geom talked about with 7-foot long swords, and that's not true at all. But there's a good reason why it came around. So Admiral Lee Ru-song, when written in Korean, is Admiral Yi Yu-song. And when you hear about Admiral Yi from the Imjin War, then naturally everyone thinks about Admiral Yi Sun-shin, the great war hero of the naval army. And he happened to have 7-foot long swords. So there's a wrong Admiral Yi being impersonated here. It's not Admiral Yi Sun-shin, it's Admiral Lee Ru-song's sword form, and he didn't use 7-foot long swords. He used 3-foot 4-inch long swords. Now, the other myth is that Jedok Geom has 14 stances. And it commonly says, and there are 14 stances of Jedok Geom. But we're actually unsure where this comes from. And it's probably due to there being 14 pictures that came with Jedok Geom. However, if you look at the named stances, there are 11 of them. So, there are 11 named stances, but you can subdivide some of them. So, you can get between 11 and 15 stances depending on your interpretation of them. My interpretation happened to land on 14. Not that I tried to make 14, but there were 14 stances that I derived from it. Now we get to the real question of it. Can you learn martial arts from a book like byeolungeom? And the answer is yes and no. So yes, you can if you have a good foundation already. If you have another sword form that you've learnt, or if you've got a traditional martial art that uses swords, then you can probably learn it yourself from the book. It just takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, like I did. It took me months and months to get the basic form down, and then a long time nuancing that. And even then, I still don't think I'm done. I'm still on a learning pathway. What I say here, maybe right, maybe wrong, might change in future, but I just wanted to share it with you guys. But if you don't have this, then you can't learn it just from a book, which is why I'm creating this series. This series is to show you the different stances of the form, tell you about the form, and hopefully make it more accessible so that people like you can learn it on your own. And if you are in that yes category, then if you read byeolungeom, often you get things like attack with the right arm and the right leg. What does that mean? No idea. So I have gone and I've watched the Suwon Fortress and also one of the Korean dojangs who practice this form quite extensively. I've spent probably tens of hours just watching this form on repeat so that I could record the steps in a lot more detail in my document down below. So have a look at that and share that with your friends, and hopefully you'll continue with us on this journey in exploring Jedok Geom. So with that, I'll see you on the next episode, and I hope you have a look at that document, share it with your friend, and if you like it, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.